Remember Me is all about how you're living life and how you're going to be remembered, what kind of legacy you're leaving. And over the last few weeks, we've been talking about stories of people who have been able to leave that legacy. And one of the most influential roles in society, I would say, is the President of the United States.
Absolutely.
And, we have President's Day that we just celebrated. And so we thought it'd be interesting to just talk a little bit about what some of our past presidents have done in relation to their taxes and tax planning. And, as regular citizens, we have a duty to pay our taxes, but sometimes we think of that duty as something that's a big burden, and we don't have a lot of say. The Revolutionary War was fought over partially the taxation without representation, and that's one of the things that I feel like a lot of people still have issues with, because there's not a lot of representation on how we're taxed, other than we get to vote and but we don't get a direct say in how we're being taxed. But here's a role, right? President of the United States does have a significant say in how taxes are executed and policies and how audits happen and so on and so forth. A lot of it falls within the executive branch, and the part that doesn't, he still has a significant say in how budget allocations and legislative policies are carried out. So we wanted to kind of dive into some of these stories from presidents and past presidents and their tax situations. So before we kind of get into that, Mike, tell us, who's your favorite president?
I think my favorite president was Ronald Reagan, because I grew up with, I started voting a little bit earlier than Ronald Reagan, but he was kind of in the limelight a little bit more than most of them were. I think he brought everything he was an actor. So people knew him as an actor, and he was very well known. And I remember his campaign, everybody thought he was too old to be president. So the campaign was, look how young he is, and then he revolutionized the way things were. Well, he revolutionized economics, and we hear about Reaganomics all the time still, but he revolutionized a lot of things and made things easier for people to understand. That's why I really like Ronald Reagan.
And just, the communication up to that point from, the Oval Office to the people was very different. When you get an actor in the White House, it's going to be different. And we're seeing some of that nowadays with President Trump, where, he comes from a very different background. Very different background. And, personality-wise and everything, he's probably very different from anybody that we've had in the Oval Office before.
He's been in the media more than probably anybody else. If you go back years ago, he had all these bankruptcies and all these kinds of things happening to him, and everybody knew Donald Trump. So
he's a household name.
He's a household name, yes.
And for better or for worse, we're going to dive into a little bit about his tax planning, but let's talk about some of the past presidents. So you mentioned Ronald Reagan. We did some research before today's show to just look into a little bit of some of the interesting things that past presidents have had as part of their tax filings, or also as part of their planning for income taxes and transfer taxes and so on. One of the things, again, as an actor going into the White House, Ronald Reagan had a lot of income that came from royalties and from not actual
non-government. It was non-government.
Non-government that continued paying him residuals, and so he had some significant potential tax liability from those things.
Didn't Ronald Reagan also kind of oppose a lot of the taxes, because he was paying over 40% taxes?
Yeah, so it's interesting, because a lot of times we look at these tax returns from the presidents, and they pay a much smaller percentage than maybe even the average household, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's fair when we're using public funds to pay these people. Maybe we don't want them to, have as big of a tax burden just giving it back, right? We would rather have their salary be appropriate than to tax about it. But Reagan was paying one of the highest tax rates of any president.
Yeah.
And I think you said close to 40%. I think that's accurate. So, one of the things that he did during his time in the presidency was tax reform and lower taxes for a lot of Americans at the time. But it's interesting because, I don't know how much of an effect it really had on his taxes.
That's a good question, because I don't know if it really affected him, but it did affect, because of those tax reforms. That's where the Reaganomics came into, and it started lowering taxes for businesses and the regular households, so people were able to spend a little bit more and keep a little bit more. So it actually boosted the economy.
So, even before Ronald Reagan, looking at some of the other presidents that had tax, interesting tax stories, right? One of them was Franklin Roosevelt, and of course, a lot of our presidents have released their tax returns to the public. It's not something that's required. They've chosen to do that, and part of it is transparency, and I think part of it is just a gesture of goodwill. I think originally it was a political tactic to to make themselves look good in relation to their opponent.
Well, I was thinking about that also, and just thinking, how many of us would want our tax returns exposed like that? I wouldn't.
Yeah,
and it's something that if they do that, I have all respect for them for doing that.
But it's become customary.
It has been. It's the last 40 years or so, right?
Most presidents have, either as a candidate or as president, they've released their tax returns, and so there's some transparency there. And Franklin Roosevelt was one of the ones that didn't release his tax returns to the public, right? But since then, they've become available and people have been able to see him. He's been passed away for a while now,
right?
But one of the big outcries, I guess, that people had against our current president, President Trump, was the fact that he didn't release his.
Yes, breaking with 40 years of tradition, right? He didn't want to release them. He said they were under audit, and I think that is actually required for presidents and vice presidents to have their taxes audited.
Well, and maybe that's just political cover, but at the end of the day, I mean, if you're a real estate mogul making millions of dollars and you have all this stuff going on with your taxes, maybe a little bit different than the person who gets in office and their tax return is a 1040 with their income from the White House, right?
Right.
So I mean, maybe there's some understanding there, but at the same time, from the time of Franklin Roosevelt, I want to say that most presidents, if not all of them, have released their tax returns to the public. Mm-hmm. Do you think that that's one of the things that, as a public, that we should expect, is to be able to see that transparency and see what our presidents are paying in taxes and how they're approaching their taxes? I
know that you can see a lot of their personality through the tax return, so that's probably a good thing to see if they're on the up and up. So it would be hard for me to release my tax returns, but for the president, I think as the transparency thing, I think it's a good thing, a good gesture.
So, in law school, I took a class from a tax law professor, and one of the things that his favorite sayings was always, this person, we would do a case study, this person gets to pay taxes in the land of the free and the home of the brave, right?
You get to, yes.
Right. It's a privilege to pay taxes in the land of the free and the home of the brave. But one of the interesting things is, when you get into public office, is it something that, they approach it as an opportunity that they're giving back, that it's, goodwill, or is it something that, again, that they're trying to avoid? And do we want our public officials avoiding it?
I think we don't want them to avoid it. I think we expect them to be, just like one of you, just like us. But I think, because they are in a public office, they should have some kind of...
It sets a tone.
Yeah,
it sets a tone for the rest of the country and for the rest of us who maybe take a point from what they do. So we're going to explore this more when we come back, and join us next week. Also, we're going to have Taxes Master tax planning firm join us as a guest next week to talk about tax planning strategies. But we'll go ahead and break and we'll be back in just a little bit.
Hey, can I ask a real quick question as we go to break here? And that is, we need to specify this because the legal hour, you're talking about legal things, but this does not constitute legal advice in the sense that people listening can't say, I have a client-attorney relationship with you guys, right?
So no client-attorney relationship. We're happy to sit down and talk and give you some advice personally if you want to meet with us, but nothing that we talk about should be construed as legal advice. So we'll see you in just a little bit, and we'll give some more insights as to our president's tax returns.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll be back after this.
And we're back. So this is Remember Me, the show where we talk about how you're remembered, what you can do during your life to leave a legacy and to control, how posterity and those that you leave behind remember you. We're talking about presidential tax returns and tax planning. And next week, we're going to have a special guest from Taxes Mastered. It's a tax planning firm that helps business owners to lower their tax liabilities through strategies that a lot of business owners are just not aware of. So we'll have them as a special guest next week. But we thought it'd be interesting in light of President's Day to dig into some of the tax planning and tax strategies that our past presidents have used and our current president uses, I'm sure, and has used in the past. So, before the break, we were talking about Ronald Reagan. We were talking about President, Franklin Roosevelt. And let's talk about some more recent presidents. So, President George Bush Sr. Was one of the most charitable presidents that we've had in office. And we know that from his taxes because, we actually have proof that he gave away, I think it was close to 60% of his income to multiple charities during his time in office. What do you think it says about our president when they have significant charitable contributions?
I think it shows compassion. I think they look at people that can't do for themselves and want to be able to help them out. And he did give back to his alma mater, but he also had some Barbara Bush funds that he funded as well. I think that shows that they want to give back. They want to be known, and that's part of their legacy. They want to be known as a charitable person, a person with compassion, a person that wants to help.
So again, kind of playing devil's advocate here. Some tax strategies are beneficial just for the taxpayer, right?
Right.
And then we say that it's for charity, but really it's just to get away with paying less in taxes. And it's we find ways to be able to benefit ourselves. And to be fair, the law allows for that because we want to incentivize. For example, we want to incentivize charitable giving. Most of the humanitarian needs in society and in the United States today are satisfied not by public funds, but by private charities. So we want to incentivize that. But is there maybe when we see a president giving to charity, I think most of the time it is, look at the big heart that this person has and that they're giving away. But can it have a double-edged sword? Well,
if you look at Bush, he gave more than half. So I think there comes a time where that's a little bit excessive than what the tax breaks would be. But if some people, I think they like to give to be seen, so they, it's that perception they have. People want people to think that they're big-hearted, but you have to look at how much they're giving.
Well, and sometimes we look at, the Carnegies and the Rockefellers, and they've established these foundations that perpetuate for generations. And it is a legacy, and it does good works, and it helps to build up, our educational facilities, and it helps to build up our museums. And, as a culture, it's something that really benefits society. And I think that's part of, a lot of times, especially what, George Bush Sr. was contributing to, Yale University and some other places, that helps to build up society. And I think it's a good example of things that we should want to do. As a tax planner, sometimes I sit down with clients and we talk about private foundations and establishing these foundations for the purpose of benefiting, a charitable purpose. But again, can this have a double-edged sword? And I bring up the example of the Clintons, because again, one of the criticisms has been how much money flowed through nonprofits that they were in control of, and where did the money actually go that they got these enormous tax breaks from and donations from all over the world from.
They really can have a double-edged sword, because it depends, like I said, where the money's going, what kind of charities they're giving to, what kind of funds they are trying to fund. Are they reputable? Are they real?
Who's in control of it? How much of the money's actually going to the charitable cause?
Right.
Right. So, I think it definitely can backfire from a political perspective when maybe it is primarily a tax strategy or a tax avoidance strategy.
Right. And this like we were saying, it kind of brings in that the trust factor. Can we trust them? If this is what they do in their private life, what are they going to do with their presidency? What are they going to do with our lives? Because the presidents, like you said, they're most very, very powerful people, and they have a lot of influence, very influential as well. So if we can trust them in their private lives, we feel like we can trust them with our lives.
So I guess from a philosophical perspective, should paying taxes be something that, that if we're using tax strategies to minimize our taxes, that we're hiding kind of in the shadows and being ashamed of those strategies? Or is it something that, we pay our fair share when we have to, but using legal loopholes that are in the law, should we be ashamed of that?
I guess it depends on why are you using those loopholes? If they are just to avoid things, if they are hiding shadows, because if things are done in the shadows, that seems like it's a little shady, right?
Well, I think, at the end of the day, the law ends up the way it is for a reason. You got to believe that every time that we get a new, budget that Congress approves, and, the tax implications of that so much thought, so much paperwork, so much, work went into doing that it's not like they're forgetting about these loopholes. I mean, they're talking through a lot of these things, and they've envisioned a lot of the loopholes that we, refer to are actually things that Congress envisioned as breaks that we wanted to provide to the public. We do a strategy that's called the charitable remainder trust sometimes when people are, looking to avoid capital gains on highly appreciated assets. And one of the questions we get is, well, is this something that's above board? How does the IRS see this? Is this something that's legal? And, should we be doing this? And there are some strategies that are kind of in the shadows that maybe you shouldn't be because they're questionable. But there's other things that are in the code. They're specifically envisioned. And should we be taking advantage of those? I would argue if it's there, we should.
I think ethically, if it's there and if it's, like I said, ethical, yeah, let's take advantage of it because they're there for a reason, like you said. They are there for a reason.
So let's apply that to our current president, Mr. Trump, right? Okay. As a candidate, I think he took a little bit of heat, and he's taken it again recently, with the fact that he doesn't want to release tax returns. But this is a guy that for his entire life, he's had significant income to have to plan taxes around, right? And in fact, when he started out, inherited a fortune from his parents that to a large extent was not taxed because they used effective tax planning strategies. So, now looking back and saying, well, should he have paid taxes? I think, the everyday person looks at that and says, well, I pay my fair share in taxes. Why isn't President Trump paying his fair share in taxes? And maybe it's because he did something right, and maybe it's because he did something wrong.
Well, who's to say he's not paying his fair share because of those loopholes that we've talked about and those strategies that we've talked about? I mean, nobody wants to pay more than they have to, right? And Trump is he's no exception.
Yeah, but I mean, if you think about, the millionaire that pays 1% in taxes, they're still paying more than the person who earns $10,000 is on welfare, right?
Absolutely.
And is maybe paying, or somebody who's even making, $100,000 and paying at 25%.
Well, you look at that millionaire, the one that's making the $1 million. He's actually probably providing jobs for others that are making more than the $10,000, and the one that's doing the $10,000 on welfare, they're taking away from the system rather than contributing. So there's the contribution factor as well.
Well, and in our, capitalistic society, right, we want to incentivize the economy. We want to incentivize them to make more money, because if they give up on making more money because it's going to be taxed at a 40% tax rate, is that going to hurt everybody, right?
Oh, it will.
And
It
so,
will.
at the end of the day, we look at people like Warren Buffett or, President Trump, and maybe their average tax rate is a 15% tax rate. Well, how do they do that? I mean, a lot of their business ventures, and I know that right now we have a candidate, on the Democratic side, the founder of Amazon, right? Starbucks.
Starbucks. Okay.
Starbucks that again is taking some heat because of how much he's paid in taxes. But at the end of the day, who are we to judge whether he's using legal strategies to do that and whether that's proper or not?
Well, look at Starbucks. Take Starbucks, for instance. They employ hundreds of people, thousands of people, and each one of those employees pay taxes. So in essence, he's paying more taxes because his employees are paying taxes as well. But he should get breaks as well, right?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think, part of what we want to do as a society is avoid a lot of these loopholes because of the unequal distribution of the access, not to the loopholes, not to the strategies, but access to the information. Right?
Information is king.
And when people don't have the information they need, they can't take advantage of it. So that's one of the things we're going to address next week, as we have a guest from Taxes Mastered, a company that focuses on helping small business owners and business owners in general to maximize their tax deductions and to save money in taxes, and using a lot of legal strategies that we can discuss. So join us next week, and of course this show is sponsored by Intervivos Estate Planning Solutions. We'd love to hear from you. Phone number is 801-477-1570. Again, 801-477-1570. And thanks for joining us on Remember Me.